Hello folks, and welcome back to another Sail and Chat episode. And this one is going to be a follow-up to the State of the Game video I made last week. And last week when I made the video and I said things like, the game is too simplified, it doesn't have enough complexity, quite a lot of people jumped on me and said, oh, well, you just want to make it so difficult because you've reached the top of this game, and so on and so forth. And what I started to kind of realize is that a lot of people saw what I said as a very sort of black and white statement, as in, oh, you just want it to be super complex. You wanted like War Thunder naval forces. That's not what I asked for. I didn't ask for War Thunder naval forces. World of Warships is a fun game and it's easy to get into, but it's right now to the point where it's so simple that balancing is becoming incredibly difficult, or it's just becoming near impossible at times. Not only that, but the gameplay itself has a number of flaws. When I say I want more complexity, I meant a little bit more complexity. A little bit, of an increase to how complex the game is, some additional tweaks here, maybe a few additional variables here. Not changing the game to the point that it becomes War Thunder, which is incredibly complex. Not that, but maintaining sort of the ease of being able to get into it, maintaining the feel of what World of Warships is, but altering some small things to make it so the game has the level of depth, which makes it fun to play. So for example, last week I mentioned the HP system, and how I'm not happy with the way the HP system and the damage control stuff works right now. And the amount of people that jumped on me and said, oh, well, you just want War Thunder levels of complexity, and you want sort of War Thunder damage models, and you want the one shot, everything gets killed off, whatever. You want that. Let me make it clear. That's not what I said, and it is not what I want. Think about the game right now for a minute. Just think about it. Think about how frustrated you feel when something's able to continuously burn you. Think about that. Think about the times where you've been burned to death. Think about the times when a carrier comes in, drops torpedoes, and you instantaneously take massive alpha damage. Is that fun? Think about the times where you're trying to hold back on that very, very, very precious damage control party because you know that even though the fire that's on your ship right now is causing you damage, you can't use that damage control party because if you use it, and you get set on fire again, there's nothing you can do. You're just going to sit there, twiddle your thumbs, and burn to death. How many of you got frustrated, for example, when you were bombed by a carrier, and you knew that carrier set 2 fires on you, and was just waiting for you to pop the damage control party? So now you've got a decision to make. If you pop it, you die. If you don't pop it, well, you're going to take a huge amount of damage through fire. It's not fun. Then that's one of the problems with World of Warships. Because the whole HP and damage control is so simplified, there's no fun there. What I kind of want when it comes to, let's say, the HP and damage control system looks something more like this. So assume that you have a ship that starts off with 10,000 HP. That's undamaged, full HP. And you take a salvo. And that salvo does 5,000 damage. But your ship has a 50% damage absorption capability. So now what happens is you take 2,500 instantaneous initial alpha damage. You have a damage over time multiplier of 1.0. Now this 1.0 comes from, let's say, a ship's build quality, or maybe how large a ship is and how potentially easy it is to control damage or something like that. So because it's 1.0, that means now you've got 2,500 remaining damage from that initial 500 damage salvo. And that 2,500 remaining damage is now applied as a damage over time over, say, 60 seconds. But let's say your ship also has the ability to repair itself a little bit. So around, let's say, 50 HP a second. So now what happens is that you have this orange bar that's going to start going down, and you're going to have this green bar that's going to come up. And the orange bar is going to go down at around 41.66 HP per second, let's say. And the green bar is going to come up at 50 HP per second. And what's going to happen is that around 27.3 seconds later, these two bars are going to meet up, and your ship is going to have 6,363 HP left. Roughly somewhere around there. Is this a little bit more complex than the current system? Sure, it's a little bit more complex. Is it going to affect your game to the point all of a sudden you don't know what you're managing? No, not really, because all of these numbers are going to work sort of automatically as you captain your ship around. Except by knowing the capabilities of your ship, you know exactly when you might want to see cover or when you can actually keep pushing with your ship, because you know that the enemy can't maybe do as much damage or can't do enough damage to sink you quickly. But these are all things that you'll at least know. So does it make the game a little bit more complex? Sure. But it's not to a level where all of a sudden it turns into War Thunder. Now, this system also is going to provide wargaming, for example, with a way of actually balancing nations a little bit more. So for example, right now, if you've got, let's just assume right now, let's talk about Tier A battleships, because I'll throw in the little wrench in for you later. So right now with Tier A battleships, you have the Amagi and the North Carolina. Think about these two ships in game right now. The Amagi is a little bit faster, the North Carolina has a little bit easier time in terms of its armor. So yes, there's a few differences, but really that's all there is in terms of damage control, in terms of their repair. You don't really feel that difference between those two nations. Now all of a sudden, if you have this particular system in place, now you can implement national traits to battleships. So instead of saying right now, which is IJN have way better dispersion than USN battleships, and then doing that to the game, which really pisses people off because the RNG becomes the determining variable. Here you've got a situation where you can balance it by saying, okay, the USN ships were built better and they were better crewed, so maybe now the USN battleships will have a better damage over time multiplier, and their repair rate is going to be a little bit better than the Japanese one. Which means, as a sort of a soft stat, the USN battleships are going to be better at absorbing damage, giving you better survivability in the long run. However, because historically the Japanese weren't so keen to follow, let's say, naval treaties, and they sort of flouted the rules, that their ships were a little bit bigger. Well, bigger ships may be better damage absorption. So there you go. That allows, let's say, the US and Japanese ships to have sort of that balance. Now, all of a sudden, if you throw in other navies, like the Royal Navy, and especially considering a ship like the King George V class battleships, which have 14-inch guns, but are essentially in the same category as a Tier 8 ship, now they're not going to get gimped based on the fact that their guns are smaller. Now you can say, okay, well, the Royal Navy might have substantially better damage control and substantially better build quality. And all of a sudden, that gives you a little bit more flexibility when trying to balance nations. This is just a system that really doesn't add all that much additional complexity, but will allow for better balance in the long run, because different nations will now be able to have slightly different, shall we say, flavor, whatever you want to call that, and it'll allow wargaming to give each nation its own peculiar thing. Right now, for example, if you look at the game in its current state, without something like this happening, what would you do to make a King George V class battleship competitive with 14-inch guns at Tier 8? There's not much, because if you say better AA, it doesn't really affect ship-on-ship combat. You can say, well, it's a little bit faster, but World of Warships, the speed difference is like 2 knots, and that's not really going to really do anything. Better armor, but again, with simplistic penetration mechanics, as long as I can penetrate, you can do good damage, so that's not really going to... So you see like how right now, with everything being oversimplified, it's hard to always say, right, here's how we're going to balance something, right? This is one of the issues that I was thinking of, and I was like, yikes, what are we going to do if we ever have to run into ships that don't neatly fit into a category? Another one, the Scharnhorsts. 11-inch guns. Which tier are they going to be in? I mean, considering they were essentially supposed to be comparable to some 30,000-ish ton battleship, they'll sit at what, tier 6, tier 7? How does that compare with battleships with substantially better guns? You've got to give them something. And it can't just be, well, let's give them near impenetrable armor. That doesn't make any sense. You can't do that, right? Most of these ships are still somewhat based in history, so where's the advantage for the German battleship there? There has to be something, right? Maybe they have just really sturdily built ships, and all of a sudden their damage over time variable is better than every other country. So there you go. That's something that will allow the game to achieve some semblance of balance even when ships don't really fit neatly into a category. How about carriers right now? What are one of the main issues that carriers have to face? Well, that's getting carrier sniped, because if I can come in and instantaneously wipe out your carrier, basically as if your carrier had no ability for any kind of damage control, then massive advantage to my team. Well, what if we had a system like this where a carrier can absorb a whole bunch of damage? Well, that's going to allow a carrier not to get instantaneously nuked. That's also going to create a situation where now the enemy team's carrier might say, okay, maybe my main job is now to deal with other surface targets, and then I can help my team push through, and then we'll deal with the carrier at the end. All of these things will make the game a little bit more complex, but in terms of its effects on gameplay, it should be quite a bit better. Now, I know everything I've said so far, if you really want more details about it, there's a link in the video description where I've linked it to a Google Doc that we're working on. We're still not done, but it will explain this in quite a bit more detail. If you want, go take a look at it and let me know what you think. Here's another example of something that the game can do in terms of adding a little bit more complexity that will have quite large ramifications for the game. And quite honestly, the way I think about it, if this was added, it'll make the game quite a bit better in quite a large number of ways. Think about the game right now, at least in terms of how fighter scouts and scouts work. The only thing the regular scout adds to your gameplay when you use it is that it gives you a little bit more range. Otherwise, fighter scouts do everything that the scout does. It goes up, it circles around, and it might randomly spot stuff. Oh yeah, and it has the advantage of attacking the bombers and stuff that does fly into your, the fighter scout's range. And pretty much, you see it right now in the game. The minute people have the choice to load up the fighter scout, everybody uses them. And so what happens? Well, the fighter scouts kind of just circle around. Like I said, they randomly might spot a destroyer. They cause a lot of grief to CV players. And they just don't really take all that much skill to use or all that much thinking. It's just, oh yeah, let me just hit that button, plane flies over there for 6 minutes, providing me with some kind of defense. But what if this change was made? So what if this change was made? It's a small change, adds a little bit more complexity, but think about the ramifications to the gameplay, and I'll sort of lay it out for you. Alright, let's assume right now that the fighter scout maintains its duration, it maintains its role of circling over your head, and it attacks stuff. But let's make one change. Let's make the change to the regular scout. Instead of having the regular scout provide a slight increase to your gun range, which really isn't all that useful, why don't we have it so that the regular scout, once you send it up, you can press with the same key that you've launched it with, which I believe is the Y key. Let's say you face it in a direction, press the Y key, and that scout will fly in the direction you pointed it to. Now the scout will, let's say, last a little bit less time than the fighter scout, but its advantage is that it can be directed to a direction. It can attack planes, but it can go and spot stuff. Alright, now think about the ramifications here for a second. First of all of a sudden it gives cruisers the ability to hunt destroyers now. That'll be interesting, because this will allow the natural enemy of destroyers to have a means of actually spotting them. Okay, so once that's done, the cruisers and the battleships both have a choice. Do I want to maintain some anti-aircraft defense, or do I want the ability to spot destroyers? Okay, once that decision is made, we might see a decrease in, let's say, the catapult fighter users. The decrease in that might bring back CVs, which now might bring back USN cruisers, because that'll give them a role all of a sudden. The USN cruisers, coupled with an actual controllable scout and their amazing AA, can now protect people against both aircraft and actually hunt destroyers. Alright, that's not a bad change. What about if, when all this is done, this will also affect destroyers, because all of a sudden destroyers now realize, oh, hold on a second, there is a potential threat that is going to be coming from cruisers. Maybe instead of using my smoke in a super offensive manner, like destroyers love to do these days, which is go somewhere, pop smoke, stop, and just fire at you from inside their smoke cover, maybe now I need to try to maximize my ability to use my stealth, and then in the event of danger, I can use the smoke as an escape mechanism. So turning smoke into something that can both allow you to attack with and also defend with. That could be interesting. What if all of a sudden now, with the implementation of a scout that can actually move, it all of a sudden provides a use for destroyer anti-aircraft? Right now, think about the uses of DDA. Name the number of times where DDA has been useful to you. Not that many. So now all of a sudden, maybe how strong your anti-aircraft on a destroyer is actually going to be valuable. So the better equipped destroyers might not be a good place for scout planes to go. So maybe instead of every destroyer just sort of going off by themselves, smart destroyers will say, hey, hold on a second here, I'm better at killing ships, but my AA is really weak. Maybe I need to buddy up with somebody, or maybe I'll buddy up with another destroyer. We'll stick together. So this little thing, this little change, making a scout plane controllable, changes so many other things in the game. It adds a whole bunch more complexity, which makes the game more interesting to play, but really it hasn't lost the simplicity of the actual mechanism itself, which is send aircraft in that direction. That doesn't take all that much more. It's not like I'm all of a sudden saying, here, you're going to have to now pilot that scout plane. I didn't say that. Just now you have a way to direct it. But all of a sudden now all these other things play a role. Destroyers now really have to consider, do I want my AA on? Do I want my AA off? What do I want to do with all these things? Now some people definitely going to say, well, if you have controllable scouts, then destroyers are going to get really, really screwed. Yes, and this is the reason why last time I said it's probably a good idea that in warships we actually have other things on the battlefield, not just islands and natural stealth rating, to provide some degree of concealment. Maybe we have something like rain squalls. Maybe we have a fog bank. Some of these other things that could help make the game more interesting to play. And I am pretty sure that having these extra little bits of complexity and depth will only make World of Warships a more fun game to play and won't actually drive away people because all of a sudden the game is not simple, because the game fundamentally still remains rather simple. It's just that there's a little bit of things here and there to make gameplay more interesting. In the last video, I also talked about World of Tanks and I said something about World of Tanks being consistent. So I think there's a number of comments where people laughed at me and told me, oh wow, there's random moments in World of Tanks. Okay, I gotta clarify that statement a little bit. Yes, I played World of Tanks. I know there's RNG in World of Tanks, and yes, that RNG can sometimes mess with your game. But let's put it this way. In World of Tanks, if I get onto the side of an IS-6 with an IS-3, and I aim at a spot on that tank, and I fire, and I know which spot I'm aiming at that I know I can penetrate, 9.9 times out of 10, I'm going to be doing a good amount of damage to that IS-6. Let's take another scenario in World of Tanks. Two tanks come to a corner. The other tank has a little bit more HP than you do. But you do know that if you go around that corner and you fire, that one, you will penetrate, and second of all, you know that the average damage that you get on that shot, plus your reload time, and you know the other tank's reload time, you know that you're going to get in 2 shots while the enemy tank can get 1. You take a quick look at your HP, and you ask yourself this question. Can I take 1 shot from that enemy tank? Because you know that with 2 shots you can kill the enemy tank. If the answer is yes, and you can take that 1 shot, well then you go around the corner. Because even though there is RNG, there is quite literally 9.9 chances out of 10 that engagement is going to go the way you think it will go. Because you know, I'm going to get around, I'm going to pop a shot here, he's going to fire a shot, I'm going to take this much damage roughly, with maybe this little much HP to spare. I'm going to get my second shot off before he can reload, and I'm going to win that engagement. That's what I mean when I say consistency in World of Tanks. Yes, there's RNG. I've seen shots where you aim them, you fire it, and they kind of go just a little bit high. And yeah, sure, you miss the occasional shot. I get that. But in most cases, the shots are pretty consistent. I played World of Tanks, guys. I get this part. The shots, while there's a few that occasionally will deviate, the percentage chances of them wildly doing all sorts of crazy things is still reasonably low. World of Warships, however, is a completely different story. You fire a salvo, you watch your shots go off in the distance, and you're like, okay, I wonder what they're going to do, because they can do any random thing. That's the problem, because you don't know, if I get into an engagement, what is the consequences of the action I make. If I get in there, I have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe I get a lucky salvo, maybe the enemy gets a lucky salvo, who the heck knows. So I am actually going to show you guys this in a World of Warships test. And here's how I did the test. So I'm going to take a Nagato, and it's actually the ship I'm playing this battle, but I'm going to take a Nagato, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into a training room against other Nagatos. I didn't even want any little micro stutter or anything to affect things, so what I did was I bounded the double click to a keyboard key. So I bound a macro to my keyboard key, and what I did is I aimed my mouse at one spot, slowed my ship down to 0 knots so I wouldn't move, aimed my mouse at that one spot, and started pressing my macro key to get my ship to fire. And the results of it are extremely random. It's random to the point where I could aim at the same spot, fire 5 different salvos, and see 5 completely different things. So here we go. I'm actually going to show you these results, and you let me know what you think, because this is what I mean. This is what I mean when I say World of Warships has none of the consistency that World of Tanks does, because in World of Tanks, yes, there's RNG, but yes, there are still levels of consistency. Take this shot, for example. So here I am, pulling up to a Nagato that is essentially bow on to me. I aim my guns, I slow the ship down to 0 knots, so make sure that there's 0 knots. I kind of adjust where I want to fire, and take my hand off the mouse. There's the minor adjustments there. You go, and then once I've stopped, I'm not going to do anymore, okay? Take my hand off the mouse, and I press my macro key. First salvo, 5 hits, incapacitated a forward gun, 11,000 damage. In World of Tanks, damage is relatively consistent if you shoot at the same spot. Yeah, there's some fluctuations in the damage rolls, but damage is pretty consistent. Not in World of Warships. It can be wildly different from salvo to salvo, even if you aim at exactly the same spot. So that was my first salvo, which is 11,000 damage. And I only hit like 5 hits or something like that, and incapacitated a turret. Second salvo, still no change to where I'm aimed. Now did 16,600 damage on 7 hits. And you'll see, once I get this reloaded, I'll fire off one more salvo and it becomes even wilder. And this is what I mean. If I decide to angle my ship and I go in, I have no idea what kind of result I'm going to get. If I take 10,000 damage, it's not going to hurt. If I take 20,000 damage, that is going to hurt. But I don't know what's going to happen. And because I don't know, there's no consistency. So take a look at this last salvo here. All of a sudden, I hit frontal citadel and it did 21,300 damage. This is my problem with World of Warships. If Wargaming wants to make it into an esport, it cannot be this random. The damage fluctuation cannot be that massive. Because if it is seriously this random, no esports athlete wants to play something like this, because it will just end up being insanely frustrating. Now, if you think about any other esports game out there, no matter how that game is, there's a certain level of consistency, which is why I think that World of Tanks did it right. So take a look at this engagement here. So I'm pretty close to an enemy battleship. And I'm going to start firing at the same spot. First salvo gets in there, 13,000 damage. Nice. I did 13,000 damage to battleship. This is going to be good. If I'm able to sit here and pound out 13,000 damage consistently, this battleship will be underwater in no time. So that was my first salvo. And remember, during this time, my mouse doesn't move at all. I don't even touch my mouse. I just press the keys on my keyboard. So there is nothing that I, as a player, am doing besides firing my guns. So next salvo in there. Okay. almost 15,000 damage, right? I'm gonna get this battleship in no time. So if you're an esports athlete, for example, and you're playing this game and you know, hey, at this angle, I can do, let's say, between 13 to 15,000 damage reliably every salvo. Fantastic. Now you know if I come out against a ship at this angle and I fire there, this is how much damage I'm going to do in the next minute. But this is Warship's problem, because get ready, it's going to get a lot worse. Next salvo is 7,000 damage. Okay. So that's half of what I did previously. And that's a huge damage fluctuation, by the way. If you think you're doing 15,000 damage, all of a sudden you're doing 7,000. It's like, well, that's half of what I expected, right? And it actually steadily gets worse. It steadily gets quite a bit worse because the damage ends up plummeting, and then you'll start to see shells doing all sorts of random things in this test sample here. Next salvo, 2,000 damage. Most of my shells ended up in the water. So imagine you're an esports team. You've executed the right moves, you've done everything correctly, you've come out in an advantageous position, you fire away at the enemy team, and RNG just goes, no, you're not winning today. Like, can you imagine how much frustration you would have at the game if that is the kind of thing that you get? Here's another salvo. Most in the water. I had one shell land near the stern there. I managed one hit. One. My mouse hasn't moved at all because all of this is now RNG. This is the part about World of Warships that I absolutely cannot understand at all. Just this level of RNG, where RNG is that strong. So Wargaming's dream of turning World of Warships into an esport is yeah, totally unrealistic in my opinion as of the moment. If this is what continues, oh yeah, there we go. Hey, all of a sudden 8,000 damage again. Wow. So I went from 1,000 to 8,000 to earlier 14,000. Madness. Absolute madness. Oh yeah, by the way, I end up shooting like I don't even know how many salvos at this Nagato, and just kept shooting and doing like solo damage that even by the time I actually capped out in this training room and won, I still did not kill that Nagato. You know, that's just how frustrating it was. So anyways, folks, I mean, I hope I've been able to sort of explain my problems with the game that I sort of stated in my last video. And hopefully you also get a sense, a better sense at least, when I talk about complexity. I'm not talking about making World of Warships into War Thunder Naval Forces. That's not what I asked for. All I really, really want is the game to still maintain its ease of getting into, while making a few additional changes to the game to make it a little bit deeper, a little bit more complicated, that as I explained earlier, with even the scout and fighter scout changes, even something like that, something so small, can have a huge impact on how the game can potentially be balanced and how it can affect the game itself in terms of gameplay. So now hopefully you have a slightly better understanding of what I was thinking about last week when I was talking about this, and hopefully you understand what I mean when I was talking about complexity. Anyways, I'm looking forward to hearing more of your feedback and more of your comments in the comment section below. Aside from all that, you all have a good one, and I'm looking forward to talking to all of you again soon.